Good day, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the show on this Saturday, the 26th of February, 2022. Thank you for tuning in. Glad to have you guys here. Now, my opinion on what's happening in Ukraine right now. Well, we all kind of know how this started, you know. Vladimir Putin, he wanted a guarantee that Ukraine would not join NATO. Now, all the countries on the western side of Ukraine are all NATO member countries. Okay? Ukraine was the only man out. They wanted to join NATO. And Putin was very determined that they wouldn't be able to join NATO. And this argument went on for a while the Russian troops built up around the border of Ukraine. And we could see that build up. First it was like 60,000, and then 80,000, then 100,000. And just before the time when they invaded, it was up around, I think, 200,000 troops positioned all around Ukraine. Well, now they've moved in. And they didn't move in exactly how I expected. What I expected was, on the eastern flank of Ukraine, when they first moved in, I expected them to build up defensive positions, move slowly across Ukraine from defensive positions. No, that's not what they did. They moved in with a blitzkrieg. They basically went so fast through the country, riding their armored vehicles and tanks, and when a vehicle would break down, they'd just leave it. They were moving so fast. I guess the soldiers would hop out of that vehicle into a vehicle that was moving. And there was a number of broken down vehicles left behind. Quite a few of them, in fact. And of course, the civilians consider the Russians to be enemies, and they're moving through enemy, for them, for the Russians, it's enemy territory. Moving very quickly through enemy territory. Now, Ukraine is not a small country. It's roughly about the size of Texas. You know how big Texas is. I mean, you can drive all day and still be in Texas. Drive all day long and still be in Texas, from one side of it to the other. So they've been moving rather rapidly, considering they're moving tanks and stuff. What they've done is they've dispersed their army through the country, mostly concentrating on trying to move into positions around Kiev, which is the big city in Ukraine. It's the big capital city, you know. And during this period in time, because they're doing a blitzkrieg, nobody's going to talk about this, but they're making their soldiers very vulnerable, because every Ukrainian citizen could turn out to be a potential sniper. This is how warfare works, in fact. So picture you're a Russian soldier. You're inside your tank all day, driving. You hop out to take a pee. There might be a house a quarter mile away, or an eighth of a mile away, and there might be a Ukraine person there, and you might be in his crosshairs. This is the potential that the Russian army is facing right now in Ukraine, because they're not wanted there, and the order's been put out for the men to stay in Ukraine right now. Anywhere between, I think they said the age 18 and 60, I think it was, not to leave the country. They're to stay and fight. And they've been handing out guns to their citizenry. So, we got a situation now where the Russian army has dispersed through its territory the size of Texas. So you got 200,000 people in their army, the Russian army. Okay? Roughly 200,000 soldiers. Now, you know, the population of a state like, I don't know exactly what the population anyway in Ukraine is 50 million, roughly, people. 200,000 means that just by civilians alone, they are way outnumbered, the Russian army. and they're in enemy, what they would consider to be enemy territory. I imagine that there's going to be more casualties than the Russians care to admit. This is my opinion only, because of the way they're doing this. But they're doing this because they want this to be a lightning-fast blitzkrieg operation. They want to take down Kiev, and they want the Ukraine people to wave the white flag and surrender to them. This is what they want. And this is my opinion on it, because I'm giving you guys my opinion on it. But I don't see that happening, at least not right away. And the longer they're in there spread out like that, the more vulnerable they're making themselves. See, if they were fighting from a front line, they can protect each other. But when they spread themselves out all across the country, it's much more difficult. And this is making this invading army much more aggressive. We've also seen this evidenced. I don't know if you guys seen it, but there's a clip there of one of the Russian tanks. He's all by himself. He's driving down the street. And I mean, them tanks, I'm surprised how quick tanks can move. I mean, they can move fast. As fast as a car. And there's some person driving in this clip I saw, there's some person driving in the opposite direction. The tank veers across the lanes and drives right over the top of their car. And I would say that watching the clip, I would say it was intentional. That's just my opinion only, but I would say it's intentional that the tank drove over the car. And I think their intention was to smush the person inside the car. But, thankfully, they survived. Anyway, very difficult time we're going through right now. And I look at this and I say to myself, this is just so stupid. Anyway, the NATO countries around Ukraine. Excuse me a minute, guys. The NATO countries around Ukraine, if the Russians advance, if they don't stop at Ukraine, if they complete their Ukraine operation, and they decide not to stop at Ukraine, make no mistake about it, NATO is united. They will not allow aggression in other countries that are NATO member countries that surround Ukraine. And if they do not stop at Ukraine and they try to advance into these other countries, it's going to be a very bad situation indeed. I don't want to say the words World War III, but the potential exists for a world war if they step anything outside the boundaries of Ukraine, the Russians. Because Ukraine was not a NATO member country, they were not obliged to help out in this situation. In other words, put boots on the ground in Ukraine. And in fact, Putin warned them that the consequences would be dire. In other words, he was insinuating that it could cause World War III if they put boots on the ground in Ukraine. So we're waiting this situation out. My hopes are that the Ukraine will put up and will weaken Russia's position. And it's a difficult thing to say, but the longer it takes them to take down Ukraine and the more casualties they are inflicted on the Russians, the more likely it is that they're not going to try to go into other surrounding countries. Because they could trigger World War III if they try to advance on other NATO countries. They've created a situation here. And NATO's trying to deal with this situation. And the West is trying to deal with this situation. They're levying particularly hard sanctions. Now they've started to hammer the leaders, Putin himself, his own accounts with the West. The sanctions are going to start to really bite hard against the Russian economy. The sanctions that they have coming against them. The West doesn't want World War III. But, and I don't think Russia wants World War III. The Russian people, an awful high percentage, I think, probably, or the Russian people, they don't want war. The people over here in the West don't want war. We've got a disconnect here between what the people of the world want, which doesn't seem to matter anymore, and what their appointed politicians and all the governments around the world, what they want. It seems like there's a disconnect here where they don't take into consideration what the people want anymore in any country. Right here in Canada, we had a situation happen. Now, I was watching the Russian TV, and I was watching the protests in Russia against this war. And they're basically saying, no war, no war. They're chanting in the streets, the people. And the police were coming along and picking them up and manhandling them. This is the way I would describe it, manhandling. And immediately when I saw it, and I've also saw the pictures coming in from our country here in Canada of the protesters being manhandled, immediately in my mind it was this exact same connection. It looked exactly the same. The protesters looked, it could be, if in other words, what I'm saying is the pictures I was viewing on the screen, the police dressed very similar. They all dress in black nowadays, the police do. And the protesters all look like ordinary, average citizens in both countries, in Russia and in the United States. And if you were to show a clip of the Russians being removed from the protest and taken away in basically what you call a they have the paddy wagon. That's the word I'm looking for, paddy wagon. They take them away in a paddy wagon, So watching that clip of the Russians and watching the clip of the protests here in Canada, if you were to show me both clips and not tell me which country it is, I wouldn't know. In other words, you could show me one clip, and the Russian clip of Russians being dragged away in a paddy wagon and being manhandled into the paddy wagon, the Russian protesters. If you were to show me that clip and show me clips from a couple weeks before what's happening here in Canada, it would look exactly the same. And if you lied to me and say, hey, this is in Canada and it's actually in Russia, I wouldn't know. Because what's effectively happening would look exactly the same to me. And the new technique for all of the people in the politics now, all of these big shots, there are rulers, and lawmakers, and all the people in power right now, their effective tool is mostly they just let the protests, ignore them. Yeah, you got a right to protest, sure, but we're just going to ignore you and wait until you go home. And then we're going to do exactly what we want to do anyway. And this is exactly what's happening in Russia right now. The protesters are out there and they're saying, no war. We don't want World War III. We want to live in peace. And Russia's just saying, well, we're going to do what we want to do. Regardless of what you want, doesn't matter. And it's the same thing here. And it's the same thing in every country. That's what they're doing now. They just don't care. What the people want, that doesn't matter. It's just what they want to do. And they're ruling everything, and they're basically, I don't know what you'd call it, but they just ignore the people now, at this point, at this stage in the game, because they've gotten away with it. It's something to do with new technology. That's what it all amounts to. Our forefathers, the ones who said never again, well, right now it's happening again. Our forefathers, they had gumption. That's because they didn't have cell phones. Cell phone is like worse than the television. Their mind is on TikTok. And I mean, if the war comes home to them, then they'll wake up from their cell phones when their cell phone goes dead because there's been some sort of a huge cyber attack or something like that. Or the internet's completely down, never coming back on again. Because maybe the undersea cables are... Is that what it's going to take before people wake up and say, hey, you know what? And they wake up and smell the coffee? What's it going to take? Because your cell phone will be dead, and then you'll wake up one day and you'll say, hey, you know what? I think we're at war. Who took us to war? I was on TikTok all day. You better wake up now and realize there's this disconnect between the world leaders now and the lawmakers and all these ones in power who only want to do everything. At least I'm going to speak about the ones over here in the West. They only care about PR, public relations. That's all they really care about, is getting elected again. And the ones who put the most money in the pot to get them elected, they'll do anything that they tell them to do. And it's got nothing to do about people anymore. It's corruption. Corruption within the higher part, and they don't have a sense of right and wrong. They just want to get the most fame and money and fortune and everything else that they can get a hold of as fast as they can grab it. Anyway, it's disgusting what's going on. And they're not listening to the older generation who had to fight so that we could have the good years we had. And now we're on the verge, on the brink of being, what's the word I would look at for the human race? The word I'm thinking for, extinction. Thank you guys for listening. Like and subscribe, and we'll catch you guys in the next video. Bye-bye.